You might be enticed to start your design work for larger screens. After all, everyone has these humongous phones and tablets these days, right? While the average size of phones and tablets is growing, we're going to consciously design for the smaller sizes first. If you design an interface for a phone screen, it's still usable on a tablet screen. It might have lots of white space and look odd, but the app will still work fine. Now you can't say the same for a tablet UI viewed on a phone. That'd be really hard to use, all those little touch targets. Starting with small screens also really helps you simplify and prioritize what should go into the UI. At each step, we want to carefully consider which elements, if any, to add to larger screens. Instead of using a device's exact pixel density, which can vary quite a bit, like 311 dpi or 442 dpi, Android groups devices into a number of density buckets. Each device gets assigned a density bucket that most closely matches its actual pixel density. So a device with a 311 dpi screen might get assigned 320 dpi or xhdpi, and a device with a 442 dpi screen might get assigned xxhdpi or 480 dpi. Though there are density buckets for both incredibly low density screens like 120 dpi and really high density screens like 640 dpi, you generally only have to work with the middle four shown here: 160, 240, 320, and 480 dpi. And these are sometimes referred to as 1x, 2x, and 3x. Now, these buckets give you control over the scaling of your graphic assets, things like icons. They also ensure that you don't have to create hundreds of different versions of these little icons for each screen's exact pixel density. They essentially make your UI elements almost exactly the same physical size, like really close, while letting you only produce assets for a handful of densities, like these four. So we've all seen it. When we load an older app on a nice new device, sometimes icons look really blurry. In these cases, the app most likely used a low-resolution asset for a UI element that was given a larger size. An easy first step to improving an app is to make sure it has high-resolution assets, like this one. Much better, right? While you should generally provide assets for all these major density buckets, it's normally okay to just include xhdpi or xxhdpi assets and let Android scale them down or downsample them. It's not ideal, but if you had to pick one, provide the higher density assets and not just the lower ones. However, downsampling has risks. There's a minor performance hit when Android has to do scaling for you on the fly. Additionally, Android's downsampling algorithm is really optimized for speed, not perfect scaling. It doesn't look great at all if you have to downsample from a very large 16 by 1600 pixel graphic to a small 200 by 200 pixel space. The good news is there are lots of great tools out there for automatically creating graphics for all the major density buckets when you're creating your app. One example that's useful for icons is the Android Asset Studio. Check the instructor notes for a link. Back in the days when there was just one screen density for devices, a designer might create a pixel-perfect logo or other graphic in Photoshop. Now that was fine until more screen densities started coming along, like HDPI and XHDPI. You'd need to redraw the pixels in the graphic at a larger size to ensure it was the same physical size, but looked perfectly crisp on that higher density screen. With 4 or 5 popular density buckets these days, this practice can get really tedious really quickly. Designers who don't want to repeat themselves should use a graphics app that can work with and export vector graphics. Apps like Photoshop and GIMP are geared primarily to working with raster graphics. That means they store the actual color information for each pixel in the resulting image. Those raster images can be scaled down with no problem, but you start to see blurring and other bad artifacts when you enlarge them. Vector graphics apps like Inkscape, Illustrator, and Sketch instead store information about the individual shapes in the image, for example the center and the radius of a circle. So you can scale the image up or down without any loss of quality. The shapes will just be drawn at a larger size. While Photoshop lets you work with vector graphics too, Illustrator and Sketch actually let you export your graphics to vector formats like SVG or scalable vector graphics. In newer versions of Android, you can directly use vector images in your app using a format similar to basic SVG. Sure beats exporting a whole bunch of PNG files over and over again, right?